The other thing that I would like to talk about and move on is the concept of intersubjectivity, which is absent in this framework, but I think it's very important to discuss. One of the places where you can find some basic information about intersubjectivity is Richard Young's paper, which I introduced in the first installment of these videos. Make sure to take a look at that video as well. Intersubjectivity is not explicitly, so let me answer this question for you, is not explicitly discussed in this framework. It refers to a shared internal context, according to Cramsch, which distinguishes interactional competence from other theories of communication. In other words, we can define it as the continuous attribution of intentional acts to others, to other people around us, especially during the conversation or during the interaction. It involves putting yourself in the shoes of an interlocutor. For example, if the interlocutor is talking about something sad, if you start to feel sad as well, that's a kind of intersubjectivity. I talked about this under listening, and I referred to this as empathy, and then I discussed the mirror system, the mirror neurons in the brain that help us become empathetic as someone is talking about their mental state. So through using the mirror system, we can understand the mental state of another person and react properly. This is called intersubjectivity. So it's a very close concept to the concept of empathy. It has been discussed under different disciplines like psychology, cognitive science, and philosophy, and also in language learning as well. Specifically in first language learning research, Treverthen in 1977 was the first, perhaps one of the first scholars who talked about this concept. Treverthen noticed that infants at around the age of 2 months produce actions of body, hands, and face that were associated with the vocalization of their mothers. If the mother showed or expressed happiness and, for example, laughed out or smiled at them to convey a sense of joy and happiness, the infants would also react in the same way. It means that they were so-called on the same bandwidth, and they could understand each other in more or less in the same way. That's called intersubjectivity. So it's like a mutual intentionality and sharing of mental state. Another scholar who investigated it in 1980s was Wells, who argued that receivers of messages in his study could come to attend to the situation as intended by the sender. For example, if you are finger pointing at a direction and if you want to draw the attention of another person to something else, an object or person far away from you, you do not expect that person to look at your fingertip. You would expect the person to look far away, where you're pointing to. And this is another kind of intersubjectivity, meaning that people understand your intentions and, importantly, your feelings and emotions. Now, there's also an interesting concept which is pretty close to intersubjectivity, which I would like to talk about quite briefly here, and that's called the theory of mind. The theory of mind is about understanding or attributing states of mind to other people and empathizing with them. For example, in a room like in a funeral where everybody is sad, you understand and feel the situation, and you know that everybody is sad, and therefore you're not expected to laugh out loud. Another concept of theory of mind is for people who are not exactly in the same context of situation with you. They're far away from you, or you are thinking about them. This is called the idea of displacement. When you think and talk or interact about someone or something that's not readily present in your situation, in your context, this is called the idea of displacement. So if you can understand or develop a kind of subjective understanding of the person's mood, for example, or their mental state, then you have a theory of mind about that person. Example, if you see someone who is walking a bit far away from you, but based on the body language or other cues that you receive, you get the impression, you get the feeling that this person might be a sad person or might be a happy one, or I don't like this person at all, or I think I like this person and I'd like to start a conversation with this person. All of these can be categorized under the theory of mind. So intersubjectivity can be said to be a very specific type of theory of mind which emerges during your interactions. Therefore, that's an important concept which we need to take into account when we talk about interactional competence. Now, the other concept which I wanted to mention quickly and briefly is authenticity. I have already created a video on authenticity. I'll leave the link in the comments section for you. Please take a look at them. Take a look at the video if you haven't had a chance to watch it. Now, there are two strands in interactional competence research: in authenticity and variability. Authenticity refers to the resemblance of what happens under assessment situations and everyday life. So if you're investigating authenticity, a key question is whether a single type of interaction in an oral task, for example, an interview style kind of interaction, is sufficient to assess the oral proficiency or interactional competence, and whether it's representative of everyday and naturally occurring spoken interaction or not. Most often the answer to this question is not. There are two types of authenticities. One is the situational and the other one is interactional. The situational authenticity, as I have discussed in another video, refers to the resemblance or the similarity of the tasks which are used for assessment and under non-assessment situation. And interactional authenticity refers to the resemblance of the cognitive processes of test takers or examinees under the exam conditions and their cognitive processes under non-exam conditions or in everyday conversations or in everyday life. If, as an example, you are taking, let's say, an interview test, and the interview developer claims that this test is going to predict your performance in interviews in academic contexts or in formal conversations between you and a professor on a campus of universities. Now, what happens is that this interview should really resemble, in the first place, should really resemble the interview on the campus from different aspects. For example, its linguistic structure, its macro and micro structure, and so on and so forth. But more importantly, what is going on in your mind in order to externalize the language should also resemble what's going on in your mind when you are speaking with the professor on the campus. That's the idea of interactional authenticity. Now, there has been some research about authenticity in language learning and assessment. Some of the similar concepts to situational and interactional authenticity are context validity and cognitive validity. If you are interested, please take a look at Cyril Weir's book, which is published in 2005, in which he presents what he calls the socio-cognitive framework for validation. The other idea is variability. So what I'm going to say here is that the idea of authenticity and variability seem to be at odds with each other. Variability is the result of the unpredictability of co-constructed interaction. Let me give you an example. If you allow the interviewers under assessment situation to ask anything that they like and to interact with the test taker or the student in any form that they like, their behavior can affect the behavior of the student. And that's what we mean by co-constructed interaction. Because if the interviewer is a supportive person who shows more empathy and provides more help and scaffold to the student would probably feel better and rather than anxious, and will be able to speak better under that situation, as opposed to an interviewer who's less helpful, who provides less scaffolding, and who probably doesn't smile as often. In other words, the behavior of the interviewer will affect the behavior or the language that is produced by the student or the test taker. So here's the thing. There's a tension between authenticity, which is a validity asset in language assessment, and reliability, which is also a validity asset, but the lack of reliability is a validity threat. Now, let me explain reliability in a way that is more connected or linked to the idea of interactional competence. Reliability would hold or would be maximized if, regardless of who gives the exam to the student, the performance of the student will remain more or less the same. So it doesn't matter who the interlocutor or the interviewer is, the performance of the student will remain the same. This is the concept of reliability, because the performance will be reproduced. And like I said, and I want to stress this again, regardless of the interviewer. In order to achieve this high reliability, therefore, we have to make sure that we provide clear constructions to the interviewer, that they will not deviate from certain rules. For example, they do not paraphrase the questions, or they do not provide more information than the questions that are in the sheet that has been given to them, and they do not provide actually any sort of scaffolding beyond what they are allowed to do. Now, if let's say one examiner violates this and provides more scaffolding to one particular student or one particular group of students, he will intentionally or unintentionally advantage that person or that group of students, and therefore the score, or which is representative of their performance, will be higher for those students, higher than they deserve, compared with those students who didn't receive that amount of help and scaffolding. So you see, the idea of reliability is a bit weird, and as a result, to some people it could even be a threat to validity. On the other hand, authenticity would hold that, of course, you can create an authentic situation and get into a conversation and an interaction with the student such that it resembles a very natural and authentic conversation with the student. And it doesn't matter if you provide scaffolding or not, because the whole idea is to help the student to co-construct an interaction with you. But again, it's, like I said, at the expense of reliability. So it remains to be a paradox, and I think in language assessment we don't have a very clear-cut answer for that. Now, there are some research papers on the concept of authenticity and reliability, which I would like to go through. First, Lazareton in 1996 and Brown pointed to the examiner effect. They found that there is an examiner variability in individual test scores. For example, Annie Brown conducted a qualitative investigation in which she found that how examiner or the interviewer behaves or functions in the interview session can affect the performance of the test taker in the interview session. Similarly, O'Sullivan in 2002 discussed a concept called interlocutor effect, which refers to the sociocultural identity and personal characteristics of the two people, or the interviewer and the examinee, under the exam's condition, which can affect the performance of the test taker and, as a result, their test scores. Therefore, it can be said that there is a dynamic two-way influence of the interlocutors on the test score of the test takers, because that's basically the main idea, the main crux of interactional competence. So if you are developing an interview test or a test of interactional competence, it would be necessary to investigate how intimately the interviewer is implicated in the construction of test taker's proficiency, and whether the performance of the test taker is heavily due to that co-constructed interaction, or is it primarily due to the, let's say, language abilities of the test taker. Now, of course, I should also add that it's really difficult to unpack the performance of the interlocutor in terms of whether it's his or her own ability, or whether it's due to the co-constructed interaction between the two. Finally, I would like to quote this interesting statement from Galaxy and Taylor which says whom one talks to, in other words, is not unimportant because the characteristics of the interlocutor affects the way we speak. We are all, so to speak, linguistic chameleons. If you are interested to investigate certain topics in speaking and interaction competence research, these are some ideas that have been proposed by Gates. This is definitely a non-exhaustive list. You can pause the video here and reflect on these questions and see if you would be interested to investigate them. But feel free to leave comments in the comments section of this video if you have other ideas and if you'd like to have a conversation about it. So thank you very much for your attention to these videos. If you have been following me through, you're really a trooper, and I hope that you find the videos useful. If you like them, please give them a like and leave your questions or comments in the comments section. Have a great day.